In 1856, he marries Susanna Spurgeon, or Susanna Thompson, to be Spurgeon. 2 sons, Charles and Thomas, 2 twins, were born. And by God's grace, they parented those children both not just into faith in Christ, but into the ministry. In 1857, the Pastors' College is founded, Spurgeon's College. It still exists today, preaching and training evangelical ministers globally, right there in London. In 1861, I told you this, he preached to the largest indoor crowd in the history of counting indoor crowds, 2,654 at the Crystal Palace in London. And the Metropolitan Tabernacle was then erected, and he begins in 1865 to publish his own monthly magazine called The Sword and the Trowel. Now, throughout this entire time, remember, he's preaching upwards of 11 times a fortnight. He's editing his own sermons because back then they didn't have recording, right? So someone would sit there while he preached and they would just by hand write it out, and they would give it to Spurgeon so that on Monday morning he would wake up, he would get the transcript of what he's preached, and he would just go through it to make sure it was pretty dead on to what he'd actually said. And he would make little edits and little adjustments where he thought the way that was articulated in a spoken form doesn't read well in a written form, so some editing needed to happen. But every Monday was taken up with that, and he was baptizing hundreds to thousands of converts. And then when the Metropolitan Tabernacle was finally opened, of course, the entire traffic of London was brought to a standstill because people couldn't get in. It's very controversial today, but many people don't know that in order to get into Spurgeon's church on a Sunday service, the open assembly of the saints, you had to get a ticket, because otherwise they had to turn hundreds and thousands of people away. And you were allowed, if you're an unbeliever, free access. Anyone was allowed. But if you were a member of another church, you had to apply for permission to attend, because Spurgeon was such a commodity. He had such an interest around his preaching and his ministry that people come from other churches and vacated their home churches to try and come and hear Charles Spurgeon preach. So to try and hem that, he caused people to have to purchase tickets to attend the service. Their own membership were welcome. Unbelievers and guests were welcome, but it was hard to get a ticket if you were a member at another church.